Good evening. I'm thrilled to be here. And what Penny said about the two of us growing up together is certainly true. And she's been an extraordinary, extraordinary leader and a wonderful artist advocate. The subject of my talk is public art, public theater. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about my family and the places that I grew up. I grew up in New York, in this building, this wonderful building on 57th Street between 5th and 6th, which sounds extraordinary now. It was a 6-story apartment building, and it was the apartments were the original studio apartments. One large room, one medium-sized bedroom, a large bathroom, who knows why, no kitchen, because they were considered artists' apartments. And what did an artist need? No kitchen. My parents were married in Philadelphia, and my father and my mother wanted to go to New York. So in 1941, they moved to New York, and the studio that they took over, which was on this floor, was the studio that my father and his brothers used in New York for photography. They did some of the first major location photography for Life, Look, Saturday Evening Post. And a lot of it was color location. Later on, we moved upstairs, so you would go out into the common hallway to get to the third floor, and then back up to get to the 4th floor. The building was full of amazing, extraordinary, wild, and wonderful people. There was a woman who designed all the hats for opera and for ballet, and when you'd walk into her apartment, it was like walking into a live de Chirico, because there would be all these balsa wood heads with various stages of sculptural, fantastic hats becoming. And many of the people in the ballet and opera world would come into the building for parties. She was quite a wild woman. And they would call, "Lou!" from the bottom floor. And we could never understand why they were calling her a man's name, because her name was Lucinda, but everyone called her Lou. Then there was someone who lived on the floor above us, and his name was Willie Munn, and he wore a top hat, a cape, and he had a cane with a silver head on it. And he would invite ballet dancers back in the evening, and while we would be eating dinner, we would hear thump, 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 halt, thump, thump, thump. And we would look up, and we would say, "Is Willie dancing?" And my parents would say, "No, he's not. Someone's dancing for him." The first slide that I showed you was 38 West 57th Street in New York. New York, for a child growing up, was all about scale. But before the great buildings that later were developed, we grew up in the 40s and 50s on 38 West. The other part of my growing up was on Long Beach Island, where Dad and his brothers and their mother and father built a house in Harvey Cedars. We used to go up to Harvey Cedars for dinners and just wonderful exploration times. Then we bought a house in Surf City. We rented it for 10 years and then bought it. The man who owned it before us called it Beachhead because when his family first bought it, it reminded them of the beachheads of World War II. The ocean is directly in front of this house. It's the one with the green roof. My father would fly and make kites. He would cut out paper plates, and we would write messages on them, and they would blow up. They would blow up to the kite. But then it was our duty to bring the kite back in. So we would stand there and wind this kite that had gone all the way over to the bayside and was just a dot in the sky. My parents were very beautiful, very handsome, extraordinary. My mother was almost 6 feet tall, and my father was about 4 inches smaller than her. So often when they would take pictures, in this case, my father's brother took this one, Dad would be standing on something, and Mother would be a little bit below. Dad was, you can see what I mean about them being extraordinary, but they both had a wonderful sense of drama. And for us children growing up in New York City, which was theater itself, including the streets, including the people that we would see all the time, 38 West was between 5th and 6th Avenues. We were in the middle. If you went towards 6th Avenue, 1/2 block, it was Carnegie Hall. So we used to see all of these fantastic people going to Carnegie Hall. Then if you went 1/2 block, it was 5th Avenue. And we grew up seeing Audrey Hepburn make breakfast at Tiffany's, Tiffany's being right at the end of the corner. You would see Greta Garbo with a tall gentleman walking in the park because we were 1/2 block from the park. Dad was an extraordinary photographer, and as I said, he and his brothers did a lot of work for the large photo magazines. But the circus was something that he loved, and he would take us. This is the Flying Walendas, a family that was very famous for trapeze acts that were very, very dangerous. Circus figured in his prints, theater figured in his prints, and in his paintings. He was also the photographer. Dr. Barnes asked him to be the photographer for the Barnes Foundation, to document paintings that arrived and the way they were configured on the walls. And one day, Doctor wanted to be photographed in front of this extraordinary painting, and Dad had set up everything. And just as Dad was ready to shoot, Doctor grabbed one of Dad's reverse paintings on glass and said, "Now we're ready, shoot." This is my parents, my father and his 2 brothers. Over here is Salvador, the oldest, Dad, second, Biagio, third. Dad and his brothers and the family grew up pretty poor. They discovered the Barnes Foundation through other students. And they went to the classes and attended them for a number of months. But nothing was happening for them. And when they were on the verge of deciding that what they would do would be to start a business selling produce and fruit, with a horse and cart in South Philadelphia, where their parents settled. The day after, they got a letter from Dr. Barnes saying, "You're going to Europe with me, and you're attending formally the classes at the Barnes Foundation." So they all had a sense of humor. This is the three of them on their first scholarship to Europe. Dr. Barnes gave them 3 scholarships in the very early 30s. Here they are in Mallorca, pretending they're freezing to death. They didn't have summer suits or clothes, so these are the only suits they had, which are wool suits. When I had finished public art high school in New York, I was a bit of a wild child, so my parents thought it would be a good thing for me to come to Philadelphia and live for a year with my relatives, Biagio and Ruth. So I did. And I worked for about 2 or 3 years for Bonwit Tellers doing fashion illustration and in ad agencies. And then I looked around and thought, what I really want to do is paint. And when I told my father that, he said, "But Joe, how are you going to make a living?" And I exploded. I said, "What do you mean, how am I going to make a living? You're an artist. I've grown up in museums. What do you mean, how am I going to make a living? You didn't care about how you were going to make a living." And Dad said, "Oh, yeah, oh, yes, I know. All right, well, try it," which pissed me off even more, that he said, "Try it." So I looked around, and the school that I thought I could afford, which was $500 for the year, was the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Art. They also had a competition for a scholarship to go abroad, and I decided then and there. I was self-supporting, I had my own apartment, that I'd win that scholarship and go to Europe. So I did. And I went to Europe for a summer, and it was extraordinary. All the things my father had told me about, all the places, all those paintings. I remember putting my hand in the water in Venice and saying to my friend who won the same scholarship, "Gil, it's blue-green. It's what they call Venetian blue." And the guy who was driving the Vaporetto said, "Non è portabile, signora," which means don't drink the water. Not that I had any intention. When we went to Naples, we came out of the subway station, and oh my God, I realized what they meant by Naples yellow. The sun had baked the surface of the buildings the color of Naples yellow. It was as if someone had thrown paint on all the surfaces of the buildings. I came back. I had 1 year left of school. We were in Vietnam. I graduated school, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was so torn about what was going on in this country that I thought, let me go to New York, I want to make film, I want to write. So I started going back and forth to New York. In 1970, the women's movement resurfaced, and there was a march in New York. And I thought, I want to do something. My parents were political. My mother was sort of the political, moral compass of the family. And I thought, I want to do something that heals, that helps. And so I started an organization here in Philadelphia called Women Organized Against Rape. And it was about healing. It was about moving out of my own territory, about going out into the public. And I'd never spoken before. But I was part of a group of radical feminists in West Philadelphia, and we organized. We each took different issues. We gave a talk in Fairmount, in Rittenhouse Square, and 100 of us marched up Walnut Street. Today, WOAR is extremely influential. It's been effective in changing laws, and it has programs in all the schools in Philadelphia. That was an incredible learning experience for me. When WOAR was on its feet, I left when I knew leadership was ready to take over. And I got a loft. Well, he didn't know it was a loft. My dentist, Eli Z. Booker, wonderful name, told me that he had a friend named Martin Fisher who had a shoe business on Vine Street, that maybe he would have space in one of his buildings. So I went over to Vine Street. Nobody lived there then. Vine Street, this is Vine Street, 4th and Vine. Vine Street was a series of manufacturing buildings, empty lots that PennDOT had cleared to build the I-95 connection. And then they never did anything for years and years. So I found a loft through Martin Fisher. It was actually a partially burned out building that he had. And when I first walked in, I said, "Martin, what a loft." And Martin said, "What's a loft?" And I said, "Well, it's a building that artists use to do work in." And he gave me the loft for $200 a month. It was 3 stories. And I started to work. One day, toward evening, I looked out into one of the lots, and I saw these people with lights, and it looked like they were digging. So I went out, and turned out they had city maps, and they were excavating 19th century wells and cisterns, looking for old bottles and other refuse that had been tossed in. They left, and I thought to myself, I can't work in the studio anymore. I want to move out. I want to use the area that I live in and the unexplored urban spaces of the city. So I got an axe, and I got a saw, small saw, and I tucked my long hair up under my cap and put on a pea coat, and I went out into the empty lots, and I started looking in some of these partially excavated cisterns. This was the studio on the first floor. I had also been doing a number of drawings that used materials that performed. In other words, these were pieces of steel that would be strapped to stakes, and when it rained, they would bleed. Fingernail bleed, again, fingernail bleeds, and also a connection with land and healing. Land that had been damaged, but that could heal, the same as the body. How come? So these were the wells and cisterns that I further excavated, sometimes 10, 15 feet deep. And I placed bundles in them. The bundles contained objects of my own. And I began to leave ladders. And I found that when I would leave these bundles, people would come, open what I had left, and put things of their own in them. So there was beginning to be this random collaboration that was beginning to happen. Word started to circulate about the excavations, and Richard Flood came and did an interview with me, and people started to hear about the excavations. I was invited to be a member of Nexus's first year, and my project for Nexus involved drawings of birds that were a kind of alter persona. They would kill an ornithologist because they were made-up birds. They were parts of this and a little part of that, and the thing that, the bird drawing that did what I wanted it to do, the made-up bird. There were watercolors that dealt with land and the body. And in this show, there was also something that I related to my family and to kind of a poor aspect of a country aspect of life all over the world, chickens. My family settled in South Philadelphia, where the Italian market is now. And so I went to the South Philadelphia market, and the man who was selling chickens, his name was Salvador. And I got 15 chickens from him, live ones. And in the yard outside of Nexus, I built environments for the chickens. The show, the exhibition lasted about a month. And the chickens were free to roam. I would come every day and feed them. What I didn't realize was the chickens were getting muscular. When they first arrived, they huddled on the ground. After a while, they were running around, and some of them were even flapping and flying up to some of the installations in the yard. And when I brought the chickens back to Salvador, he said, "What have you done to my chickens? They're no good anymore." And I said, "What do you mean they're no good? They're roosters. They're not chickens anymore. They're not, I can't use them." And I burst into tears, and because what was I going to do with 15 live chickens? And there were all these little old Italian women around him and me, and they started scolding him. You know, "Don't make her cry, don't make her." So I was able to drop the chickens, the muscular chickens, off with Salvador. These are continuations of the drawings that began to move into monumental scale. Speaking about performance, the drawings that I just showed you were performative. In the 80s, I did a series of drawings called the Henry Drawings. And the Henry Drawings celebrated 57th Street in a way, because Henry Lamott lived at the top of the building with his wife, Birgit. Birgit was also 6 feet tall, and when they would talk, my mother and Birgit would talk in the hallway or at the doorway, we would kind of look up at these two towering women. Well, Henry was an Olympic swimmer, and had an incredibly muscular body, but he practiced yoga, an extreme form of yoga. In order to earn money, every summer he would pack his station wagon, and he and Birgit would take off to go around the country. What Henry did was to dive. He perfected an act wherein he would dive off a ladder 40 feet high. That's 4 stories, 40 feet high, into 12.5 inches of water in a pool. For his 70th birthday, he dove off the Flatiron Building into this pool, 12 inches deep. I based a series of very, very large watercolors, 5 by 6 feet, on Henry, and combined the figure of Henry, which to me, Henry was like a biblical modern-day saint, because when you think of the Old Testament, it's really it's like a circus. I think that's why a lot of the paintings that Dad did had biblical themes. It's a performative text of the Bible. Everyone's flying off. There are tremendous storms. So here, sky mixes with water. This is Henry over an occupied sea, and although they're legs and tongues, they're sprouting hair, which means they're healing on their own. The body is hero. This was the largest of the drawings, a triptych. It's about 15 feet by 5 feet, and it's watercolor. One of the extraordinary things about working on very large formats of paper and watercolor, when it's wet on wet, you have to, of course, work on the floor, and the paper begins to act like land. It begins to rise and heave and then settle. And it almost takes you along with it. It's an extraordinarily wonderful way of working in dream and performance. Later drawings became, this was a drawing that had to do with houses for the Sisterhood of the Precious Blood. There's a kind of banana involvement with Catholicism, of pagan kinds of celebration. And this was that, and architecture as well. Man without a nose, drawing for a glass building. The house would be set like a mouth into the side of a hill. And this is about the body and the tongue. I did a number of temporary projects that had to do with the tongue. The tongue being the vehicle for language, for lovemaking, the vehicle for lies in language. And this is about a bridge for a city of lies. One of the early projects that I did that involved collaboration was with a landscape architect named Stephen Martino. The charge of the competition was to establish a gateway. And when we were told 7 civilizations made their home in this area over millennia, I thought 7. 7 is a magic number. It's a magic number in almost every culture. Buddha takes 7 steps, the 7 gates of hell, the 7 gates of heaven. So 7 was working in my mind, and I thought, for one of the first times, I thought, instead of following the charge of a competition, which was to establish a border gateway, I said to Steve, let's do something that has to do with alignment of the seasons, alignment of the cities and the monuments. And so our gateway was about the revival of the desert, which had been, as you can see, just sliced by highway. So we established 7 verticals. At an axis point, there was the form of a leaf. A leaf is what it does and does what it is. In order to survive, it's made to gather water. So where this highway cut through the buttes, we rechanneled and was delivering water out into the highway. We rechanneled from the buttes so that water would flow into the stem of the leaf. And using one of the most ancient methods of containing water, we have 7 water harvesting terraces. And when it rained, the rain came down and into the stem and out of the scuppers, flooding the terraces. And 3 years later, this is what you have of Papago Park. This also took on another aspect, which was Day Without Art. People from the various nearby cities came and decorated the arms of the sculpture with candles. So it took on another dimension that I could never have thought of, nor Steve. Materials that perform, and how nature is a collaborator for projects. This was a competition for the sculpture garden of the City College of Pasadena. And it was for a college that had a day and a night school. And it was a community college, so community was heavily involved in the college. And I thought to myself, so what is a school? What's a student? A student is about movement and change. So everything, including the plaza, the amphitheater, the pathways, everything is about spinning and turning and working with sunlight. And this long stretch here is a 450-foot channel of water. So it's like one of those toys that you spin a disc up and down on a stick. The plaza has no real center. All the radii are different. The shade structures work with sun, and the shadows move during the day constantly. These are half-crescent circles, several of them on the plaza, that are lights at night. And yet, at the same time, during the day, the sun creates a moire pattern on the surface of them. So they're constantly changing in the sunlight. The amphitheater was so that you would have collaboration between the various departments of the school. And the color of the amphitheater takes off from the color of the buttes and the mountains. The idea, since all the buildings look down on the plaza and on the sculpture garden, was that in the daytime, you see all the structures. But as nighttime comes, everything in the garden is outlined in light. It's drawn in light. And this blade of light connects everything with paths that are able to cross over it. You hear it because it's in ground before you ever see it. This is a project that was pretty extraordinary in that it was a total collaboration with the city of Santa Monica. It was a total collaboration between artist, myself, and principal of Wallace Robertson Todd, Ignacio Bumster. It was an unusual competition. They invited firms to compete, and they chose a single landscape firm, and then they brought in artists to enter a competition and somehow make a shotgun marriage. Well, Ignacio and my shotgun marriage wasn't a shotgun marriage. It was just a meeting of minds immediately. It was also a total collaboration with the community. And in this way, we developed a series of options and plans. It wasn't designed by community, but it was contribution by community. The community was invited to choose which ideas they liked best. The challenge of this competition was to unite the Palisades and the beach together. And so here you see the Palisades. Over here, you see what was first the Palisade Path. Well, an old trick of painting is to bounce light from something. The same for sculpture. Look at the difference, and look what we did with just a change in the color of the decomposed granite. They needed restrooms, so why can't going to a public restroom be a performance? Why can't the restroom itself perform? Well, in this case, you have a fiberglass roof and you have white stalls inside. So when the sun shines, your stall is a lemon yellow. There was another one that was a deep green, same thing. And at night, underneath the roofs were uplights. So the buildings bordering the Palisades had lanterns that were restrooms. If you drove by on Coast Route 1 and blinked once, you didn't realize that you'd passed Santa Monica. So the idea was to mark the entrance of the city and at the same time play with the aspect of danger. You're on the Palisades. What's more thrilling than coming to the edge of a Palisades and looking over? Well, this was disguised with landscaping, so you were completely safe. And what our concept was living theater. Palisades was our balcony for the performance of nature. South Beach was a stage for the performance of people in response to the sea. Here you see what South Beach looked like when we first saw it, a shotgun promenade. This is what we did with that shotgun promenade. It was curved in response to the sea and the waves. The striping was done with just a change of sand. And the striping was like an accordion. It helped visually to shape and compress the promenade. We had a chess area. This was the beginning of Jack LaLanne's bodybuilding. We developed areas for exhibition. This was Muscle Beach. We had designed a progressive carry-through of exercising and performance. And it was really through the paths on South Beach and in Palisades that we made major connections, including the actual performance of the body walking over abalone. When you do that in the daytime, the abalone comes to life and sparkles. The seat walls here were filled with disturbances of stone and shell, which also acted as if waves had come and left detritus on the beach. If you walk along an ocean or a sea, you see these lines of, sort of memory lines of how far the wave went on the beach. The difference between a playground that is walled in and a playground that's open and all about the sea, and that challenges children to use their bodies in various ways, balancing, running, climbing. And why can't restrooms look like beach balls and beach umbrellas? A kid goes into one restroom and they're peeing in blue. The kid next to is peeing in orange, and they open the doors and come out and say, Did you see what I saw? Why not? And this is what it looked like on a summer day. I was invited to Japan to do a project for a festival, and as you can see, the mountain range up here, these were 6 cities up in the mountains. They also got the highest amount of snow, one of the highest amounts of snow in the world, which would cover the villages. And they had an entire system of walking on rooftops to get from one place to another. They also had a very beautiful birch forest that was sacred. So there were 6 villages. This is the new communications center. So there are 6 ovals that, like ships, have pulled up to the communications center. Each oval represents one of the small cities. So I developed these fiberglass tubes that were lit at their base. They functioned as wayfinding signals, but they represented the seasons because these cities depended on the seasons for fishing and for growing. Now, again, I talked about collaboration. What do you do when you want to design a sculpture, a project, and the weather is incredible? It covers everything. So how can you make a collaborator out of snow? Well, this way. And this is, in a way, a combination of the watercolors. You put a drop of color on watercolor paper and it bleeds. And that's exactly what this does. It performs when it snows. I always wondered what it would be like to put people in color. And one of the things that I've done with a lot of my projects is that they insert themselves in the everyday life of people and of chores and tasks that they're doing. And maybe they stop you for a minute without saying, I'm art, look at me. No, they become part of what you're doing. So this is at the Fort Lauderdale Airport garage. There are 4 cylinders, 98 feet high. They go through 7 stories of the building, and they're capped on the top with architectural fabric. You get on the escalator to park your car, and you find yourself in a sea of cadmium yellow. And so for a few minutes, someone experiences the psychological reaction of being inside color. There are, on each floor, areas that allow you to look down on people on the escalators. And during the day, this is a flying mast that supports architectural fabric. So during the day, sunlight enters the roof and colors the fiberglass. And what you're doing is parking your car. And maybe you'll remember being inside ultramarine blue, green, yellow. This is a recent project. It was a station for light rail. And I wanted to put the passengers on a stage. It's about the performance of waiting for a train. So these take the place of awnings, shelter from sun and weather. They're fiberglass. In the daylight, light penetrates the fiberglass, including the seating. And at night, everything is illuminated. There's a train arriving. It's evening. They're on a platform over 3rd Street. So as cars are coming and going, maybe you're going one way in the morning and you see you're on the green side. Maybe you're coming the other way and you're on the red side. The colors, Charlotte is an extraordinary city of trees, very beautiful city. And these colors reflect the flower and the fruit of the state. They perform on their own. Okay, thank you. Speaking of performance, they perform on their own, and they become more than just a station or a canopy. Okay. Raphael Farrar came to my studio after I had moved to 4th and Vine. And he saw my work and really liked it. At that point, I was just doing drawings for things that could happen outside my studio. And he suggested that I call David Katzeff at the museum, and that's how I went to Art Park. Later on, I understand, which I didn't know about, that when Fairmount Park Art Association, Penny and several curators were thinking about sculpture that would be identified by communities and sculptors who would work with communities, that Raphael had suggested Penny to me. So I was put in touch with Friends of the Wissahickon and the community. And the community identified this site along the Wissahickon. Here you see the stone steps, WPA project, and we're right at the edge of Wissahickon Creek and this old staircase. So you would clamber up the stairs on one side, you'd get to the top, and you'd just hurry down the other side. Well, this, as you probably know, was fairly dangerous in inclement weather. And so it was suggested that a bridge be designed. Well, a wonderful thing happened. I mean, the community got involved, and I started getting letters from people who were saying they remembered old bridges at this site. But what I began to realize when I looked closely was they were designing bridges for the site, which was, again, lovely. An older man sent me this drawing, which was also a design that he was thinking about. I was thinking about a design too. And this was one of the first drawings for Fingerspan Bridge, which relates back to many of the drawings that I had done early on. But it was also about the hand touching a very physical representation of connection. Penny put me in touch with a wonderful engineer named Nick Giannopoulos, who had worked with Louis Kahn. He was wonderful, except that I was much younger, and I guess a young girl at that point. And Nick was a Mediterranean guy, and we would talk, and he would tell me wonderful stories about Louis Kahn, and we would go on and on and on, and not much was happening. So at a certain point, Penny asked him if, since we were probably number million on his list of projects, given the budget and the extent of the project, could he recommend someone else? Well, he did. He recommended Sam Harris of Kieran, Timberlake, and Harris. And when I had spoken to Nick, I showed Nick my idea, which was a span that was magical. And Nick, being an engineer who worked with major architects, wanted to put a support in the center. When I met Sam, there was an immediate understanding of what I wanted. And what I wanted was Corten steel for material, because I knew it would blend into the surroundings. I did a number of watercolors, and here we are at Pottstown with the fabrication of Fingerspan, which is my sort of archival Statue of Liberty photograph taken by Wayne Cozzolino, working with Joe at the foundry. Before this happened, before this stage, we're sitting at a table, we're trying to figure out how to get 18 tons of material to the site. And Friends of the Wissahickon were pretty skeptical. So some of the ideas were to have a pulley system across the Wissahickon, men dragging bags of concrete for the foundations, sliding down the embankment. And I'm sitting there thinking about the wonderful Fellini film of the babes on a rooftop in bikinis and the guys in the airplane, helicopter overhead, looking at the women, and the women saying, "Guarda, è Cristo, è Cristo." And you don't know what they're talking about. And all of a sudden, the statue of Christ attached to the airplane flies into the picture plane. So I thought to myself, being brought up in New York, 2 blocks from Madison Avenue, understanding publicity and communication, I thought, what a fabulous idea if we could fly Fingerspan into the site. So I suggested it, and a couple people laughed, and Sam, who by now was like a brother to me, didn't say anything. So we leave, and I said, "Sam, why didn't you say something?" He said, "Well, Jody, you know, I was a MASH pilot in Vietnam, and I'll see if I can't contact my connections." Sam was very precise about things. Well, he did, and I knew that every station would be here photographing this, and sure enough, they were. Channel 10 did an almost Apocalypse Now version of it with the helicopter rising over the flatbed trucks. And here you see, digit by digit, Fingerspan is coming to its site. There was a crew waiting on site. It was field welded. Here you have Fingerspan, which met every expectation that it was supposed to meet, which was that it be safe. But you can see 360 degrees around yourself. It blends in completely. And again, to me, Corten steel was a living material, a performing material. Once it was wet, it became this golden, deep, deep brown. You can barely see it from across the river, the creek. And here I am with Sam, Joe, and Lenny. You didn't think I wouldn't do that. Come on. And here I am with, at the time, my guardian angel through the project. And 3 hours from staging ground to this point were the first passengers across the bridge. Another bridge, a bridge that had a fate. This was proposed in Phoenix, designed. It's about the crescent moon, which was nearby in an area called Moon Valley. It rises like a wave, as if the moon is pulling it. The openings are close together. They enlarge as they go overhead. These are elevations, east and west. And this is the lighting plan. Everyone was worried about the fact that a local high school would graffiti it. And I said, why can't we develop a program with the school, with every department, so that the kids feel that they own the bridge? A way of making infrastructure something that you can perform on. It's a pedestrian bridge, and the lighting responds to holidays, to wins of the high school's teams. This last project is the project I'm working on now with the landscape team. We won the competition. It's sponsored by the DRWC, the Delaware River Front Water Commission, the Delaware I'll get it. It's much easier to say DRWC, the Delaware River Waterfront Commission. Here you have Pier 53, Washington Avenue Green, and Washington Avenue, and Columbus Boulevard. Most people don't know that Pier 53 exists, but it's existed for quite a long time, as you can see from these archival photographs and prints. What's extraordinary about this pier is it was the alternative to Ellis Island. Most people don't know that either. And when we went out for the first visit, site visit, one of the members of AES, the landscape team, Allied Ecological Services, said, you know, this was, I think, the immigration pier for Philadelphia, the alternative to Ellis Island. And I realized this is where my grandparents landed. They didn't go to New York. My grandmother was pregnant. She almost died on the trip over. They landed here and settled in South Philadelphia. The bridge became a woodland over the years of being ignored. This is the plan. It's been updated somewhat, but the idea is that this becomes an ecological park pier. And in keeping with its history of immigration, I've designed a spiral stair that weaves around a mast. And at the top of the mast, there's an 8-foot fiberglass beacon. with a solar fixture installed. So it operates in keeping with the ecology of the pier. It's lit by solar fixture. And here you can see a platform and a bench for viewing. And this is what it'll look like. And what this is a platform for viewing, for dreaming, and for remembering. It's both crow's nest on a ship and a place for thinking about one's long-gone relatives, and at the same time, just being with yourself, remembering. And this is the plaque for the sculpture. And last but not least, this is me with my grandmother, Josephine Rose, and I'm named after her, Josephine Pinto, Jody Pinto. So thank you. I know I've gone over time, but thank you.